The gate lodge was built by Matilda and Alfred Wilson as the entrance to the Meadow Brook estate in 1928, and really for the past 20 years, since the early 2000s, the gate lodge has had no use, no purpose, and just because of water damage and no one living or really spending time here, it had fallen into disrepair. So most of the residents are going to know when they pass by on Avon or Adams or behind on the golf course, this house looked pretty sad. And there was a wonderful group of golfers led by Michael Kleeman.
I founded the Gatehouse Society probably 3 years ago. Its sole purpose is for the restoration of this building and to continue fundraising for once the restoration is complete.
And of course we said, yes, they have done all of the work really as far as restoring this and fundraising for the project, which has been huge, monumental, more than I think any of us expected.
I'm not a historian at all. I don't restore buildings. I'm not a builder by trade. I do some things that are handy, but again, I just knew that something had to be done to save this place.
We thought some of the structural things were okay and it was some cosmetic damage, but it ended up being a full kind of project. All of the electricity was rewired, all the plumbing was redone, all of the wood and the plaster in the house were restored, most of the wood on the outside, everything was repainted. We redid lights, the kitchen was restored, the bathroom, so it's been this full-scale project. This is much more of a worker's cottage than Meadow Brook Hall, but this was built very similarly to Meadow Brook Hall, and we've actually had a lot of donors in the community who've donated antique furniture and other pieces to us, and we're working on furnishing the house. It might be a little bit of a slow process, but we want this to really look like a house that the gatekeeper and his family would be living in, so that people get an idea of the different side of Meadow Brook Hall, the people who are living and working on this estate, which numbered in more than 100 people who would be working on this estate when the family was in residence, and there was more than 2,000 acres in the community. So we want it to look a little bit closer to when the workers were living here. This kind of immersion factor, I think, of being able to feel like you're actually enjoying the gatehouse as the gatehouse keeper would be.
There is a lot of history to this building, and if you think back to the 20s and 30s, this was security. This was the security system for Meadow Brook Hall.
We know from Richard Wilson, who grew up at Meadow Brook Hall, he was the Wilson's youngest son. He said that it was so hard to get his friends into the estate that it was actually kind of not worth it. He would rather go somewhere else. So they did really care about security. There were kidnapping and death threats against the family pretty regularly because of their wealth. So the gatehouse keeper had a very important role, and sometimes for the people who lived here, it was kind of annoying for them to try to get their friends to come visit, but important role nonetheless. So when someone would be coming to the estate, they would have their name put on a ledger, and we actually have a replica of the ledger that we created for the Gatehouse Society here. Their names and the type of car that they were driving would be put on there ahead of time by either the staff person or the family member that they were visiting. But still, even though they expected them, the gatekeeper would have to call ahead to the house and ask again, make sure that they were supposed to come in, and then he would let them through the gate, and they would drive a mile down past the deer park, past the farm buildings and some of the stables, through the meadow, past the brook that gave Meadow Brook its name, and along that mile-long drive, they had a very specific little peaks of Meadow Brook Hall in the distance. They might see a chimney or something beyond. But then it was just after that mile-long drive that they would finally get the full vision of Meadow Brook Hall itself, and that was planned very specifically by the architect William Kapp and the landscape designers. They worked together to make this as the entrance to Meadow Brook Estate. It was a very planned experience, a very fun experience, and people at the Gatehouse would be able to relive that again.
I think when people learn the history of this building and what its purpose was when Meadow Brook Hall was built, I mean, every visitor to the hall as you probably know, had to go through these gates. And the gates on the building we saw as the centerpiece of this building because they were so important. That was the security. If those gates were closed, you weren't getting through. So we went through some painstaking detail to replicate those gates because the original gates were so rotted and in disrepair.
Unfortunately, it couldn't be preserved as it was. It was just in way too far gone. The gate was rebuilt by a master carpenter who used the original blueprints that we still had and rebuilt it exactly how it was done originally. So it is an exact replica of the original gate, and that's something that you might not really want to take the time to find someone to do it. You know, you could make it look like it did originally, but to have it actually be built like it was originally is just going above and beyond. So the Gatehouse Society worked really closely with us to use our expertise and our knowledge of people in the field and to make sure that those dreams were really realized and done so in a very authentic way.
So just the history of the Dodge brothers, you know, Chrysler and Dodge being right in our backyard, being an extension of Meadow Brook Hall, and really, you know, everybody that comes here says, you know, I drove past that place a million times on Adams Road. I'm so happy to see somebody's in there and doing something with it.
I knew that this was going to be an important project for the history of the Gate Lodge, but I didn't have any concept that the restoration would be so complete, especially to receive an award for the preservation. It's a really remarkable project.